Well, thank you for the opportunity to address you. In my mind's eye, didn't anticipate so many good speakers in front of me, and I feel challenged. But I also am going to slightly reorient my remarks so I don't duplicate the kind sentiments that were expressed by each of you concerning the others. But I do want to start off with a premise. The order of my presentation will be one, to provide or try to provide some context from which I am viewing the formation of a group like this. Then two, I'm going to briefly outline the lawsuit. There are some strict parameters that we have in Iowa. There's attorneys involved in litigation are strictly limited as to what they can say about that litigation ongoing. I can outline what's in the pleadings, but not much beyond that. I think we should be able to talk in ways that make sense to us, but it will be briefly stated and summarize what the claims are. Then we're going to answer questions that you may have, subject only to the limitations that I just expressed. Then finally, I'd like to have a brief summary, or provide you a brief summary of where I think where these are. Here's something that happened even within a few days that I'm going to spend a little time with, because it helps to explain a theme that is at least important to me. How is it that a group like this that didn't even exist a year ago now fills a hall? I think if 2 weeks ago the snowstorm hadn't been here, you would have had the same or a larger group, which means that this is a priority in your lives. 10 years ago, I started work in litigation down in the state of Alabama to defend a gentleman who was on death row. It's something that I felt compelled to do as a part of my career. Without getting into details, I went down there being compelled when I was a young person, when I first discovered there was a world outside of my own family's stable home, I'm grateful to say. It's when they started shipping up reels of black and white footage to put on national news. You had 3 choices of 3 networks. And there I saw children of my own age being hosed down with fire hoses as they were walking along the streets of Birmingham, and other kinds of footage describing what we later came to be called the Civil Rights Movement. And that was a movement comprised of, 1, we want to desegregate the South, and 2, we want voting rights. Those made a strong impression on me, and I wanted to be a part of the legal proceedings down in that state, a state that has, in my opinion, very difficult laws compared to our own. A very disproportionate number of people who are, including my client, who are subject to that kind of punishment, capital punishment, are black, largely tried by white juries, even in counties that have large black populations. So I've been doing that now for a decade, and going down there and drawn to that part of history. In Montgomery, Alabama, I never fail, if schedule allows, to spend a few minutes in the back pew of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church where Martin Luther King Jr. First preached, and then it became the organizational base in the basement for the bus boycott that started in December of 1955. And then as I sit in the back pew and I think about what happened in history, to my left, which would be to the east, is the state capitol of the state of Alabama, where the Confederacy was started with the first president of the Confederacy sworn in, and where Martin Luther King gave his address after marching 60 miles from Selma. And then to my right, along Dexter Avenue, with my back to that avenue, is where Rosa Parks got on the Cleveland Avenue bus and refused to move. I go there each year, or each trip, and there are 4 of them a year, and just to think, and the thoughts come to me, but the thought of what it must have been like in the 1950s when people, knowing something was horribly wrong, didn't know what to do about it, and they gradually came to a common vocabulary, and then a moment, and there's an alchemy to it. We can't predict. We are humans as a group, hard to predict, and it's always clearer looking backwards than it is forwards. But think of these people, the men coming back from World War II and the Korean War, having been treated in a meritocracy, but then coming back to the Deep South, to the Jim Crow laws, and suddenly being treated in a different way. There's an energy there. Or the women who had gone north to work in the factories, in the industries, being treated equally, going and eating with other people in restaurants, and coming back then to Alabama or Mississippi and being treated again in a segregated way. There was an energy in the basements of the churches and other social halls, people knowing they wanted to make a difference, not sure how it was going to be done. And then a middle-aged lady with dignity, quiet, shy of crowds, decides she's had enough and refuses to move when she's asked to on the bus. And there was a bus boycott. People thought it would last maybe a day. They planned it over the weekend for the first Monday, and not a black soul was on a bus. And then they decided to extend it. And at the close of my talk, then I'm going to give some thoughts about who arose as the leader out of that group unexpectedly. Martin Luther King Jr., who changed the world. Well, I call this moment, in my own mind, I have a word, it's like a fermentation. It's going on, but it's not yet coate. And people are beginning to look at each other differently, maybe strangers to each other, but now bound together by a common mission. I think we're at that moment in Iowa now, and it's a different civil rights movement, that's what it is. And the fundamental right is to have access to clean water.
Amen.
Access to clean water. It's not yet in our Constitution, but it will be. But it will be. And we're not yet organized in the way that we are strong enough to bend back history in a better direction, but we will be. We will be, and this is the start. It was already expressed that it's sometimes small groups that make the difference. I would call them small bands of moral pioneers. And that's what this group is. That's what this group is, and there are others that are coming about and arising in the same way, because they have the same concerns and they don't want to be blocked by a power group, just as it was the white power group that held the South back for 70 years by discriminating against more than half of its populations in places like Montgomery. So too here. It's a small group of extremely powerful corporations who have designed an agricultural system where everyone loses but them. To be a part of a group like this is not to be anti-farmer. We want farmers to succeed, but we want it to be in a system that does not pollute our air and water to the extent that it does, and we don't want it to be a system that always leaves the farmer short by overproducing only 2 crops almost anymore, beans and corn. We have some work to do on this, and it's an important part that the 96% of us who don't farm but live downstream and who are asked to drink shit water, it's time for this to stop. And we don't have to invent this as though we don't know what we're talking about. We want conditions that we experienced in our own lives. This is what pulls us together. Well, the moment that happened this week that I want to share, and then I'll go right into the lawsuit, because I have this view of this analogy between what was going on in the Deep South in the 1950s and what's happening at this moment. I also view as a heroic figure Rosa Parks. I think most of you know her name, maybe not everyone agrees, that it's the quiet people, the firm people, the brave people who changed the world. I've held her out as a hero for a long time, and one of my favorite books, of my many, many books, my wife would say too many books, is a book written 25 years ago by the historian Douglas Brinkley. And you may be aware of him. He's a presidential historian. He appears oftentimes on CBS and CNN as an extra commentator. And 2 areas of focus in his life, he's written, I think, 26 books, civil rights and the environment. That analogy, he's a professor of history, distinguished professor at Rice University. He was the guest speaker at the Culver Institute at Simpson College on Thursday. And I went there to listen and met with him afterwards and had a bushel full of books that he'd written that I wanted him to sign. But I told him, my favorite book of yours, sir, is your humblest one. 26 years ago, a thin volume about Rosa Parks. And I'm compelled to the story that she told him because she was still alive, and they spent a lot of time together telling her life. There have been other biographies written about her since, longer, more thorough, but none that are better. And what he recognized in her life was just this part. How is it that individual people can make such a difference? I told him what was going on in Iowa. there were a line of people behind me. I sort of felt bad, but not really. Because I wanted to tell him there's something going on in Iowa. And he got it immediately. I said, I'm reminded of the Rosa Parks meeting, and we're having that moment in Iowa. He says, Jim, I'm with you. Call me on Sunday. And I called him a couple of hours ago. I was on my way. He says, Jim, where are you going? And I told him about this meeting. And I told him what you're standing up against, this huge fish kill. And this group has come together. And he says, Jim, I'm in with you 100%. So Douglas briefly knows about this meeting. And we're on our way. We're on our way. And you are part of a large piece of history. You are at ground zero of what I believe to be an upcoming and forming new civil rights movement. And this has to do with the right to protect citizens' access to clean water. Now, as a part of that, as it was with the analogy of the civil rights movement in the South, every successful social movement, you might say, but particularly that one, that's one we're talking about, a social political movement, involves to some extent litigation. Litigation is a part of that. That's where we go to resolve matters that we cannot otherwise resolve. But it's not the end of it. Courts have no armies. They can articulate principles. And then in a democracy, if we choose to follow the law, that's how we begin to move. So think of it in the Deep South. Some of these cases you'll remember. Brown versus Board of Education. May 17th, 1954 held that separate was not equal. It was inherently unequal when it came to educating our children. That overturned a half a century of precedent when that Supreme Court in the late 19th century it said separate is equal if certain accommodations are made. The Supreme Court said no. Separate is inherently unequal when it comes to that. Bowder versus Gale. That was in the 2 years later. Desegregated. That came out of Alabama too. And a parallel case to Rosa Parks' refusal to sit on to be moved on the school bus or on the city bus. And the Supreme Court said there, no, when it comes to transportation, all facilities must be equal. And then the heart of Atlanta, Motel versus the United States, another U.S. Supreme Court case that said public accommodations must be offered to the public regardless of race. How long had those precepts held us back and made us less of a nation than otherwise we should have been? Well, why do I say that? Because the whole nation didn't change with those Supreme Court cases, but it was an important part of how we became a better nation. You're in litigation, and that's why I'm here, to remind you of that fact. Will it end all? No. Will you even win or lose? I cannot predict. But what I will say, that when you've decided to move a step forward and to be part of the case against a grievous attack on your right to have clean water, you will, by filing that lawsuit, have made some difference in what will become the future of this state, because you are at ground zero of this great new movement to protect our natural resources and make them available to us. So what did you do as a group? You came to an attorney. It happened to me, and I was so lucky that you did. It is my privilege to serve. And so that we know the expenses that are there are out-of-pocket expenses that we do to pay other people. Our service here is pro bono. We're not charging for our attorney's fees. If we happen to sue under a lawsuit or a statute where attorney fees are allowed to be paid by a third party, we might ask for your permission. But our time otherwise is given to this group on a pro bono basis. So it is my privilege to serve, but the Nishnabotna water defenders are the plaintiff. And as citizens bound, the first challenge will be as to whether you have standing as a group. And individuals here will draw on to say that you have a tangible relationship to this water. Some of them are property interest, as in real property. They're proximate to the water. Others have property interest because they want to be a part with their personal property. They'd like to float on boats and otherwise use the river. And some people have wells and this kind of thing. You have standing as a group to be plaintiffs. New cooperative is the defendant. And there are three main claims that are being made, and it could expand. We just have filed the suit. We're hardly into it. But they come under what's called the common law. The common law are theories that allow people to achieve justice with others under claims that have been recognized for centuries by our courts, going back even to English common law. One is nuisance, a claim for nuisance. That is to say, the actions of a new cooperative have been such that it makes it impossible to use and enjoy the resource of the river. Your reasonable use and enjoyment has been diminished as a result of not only the initial conduct, but no assurance that what happened to cause the spill to begin with has been repaired in any permanent way. We are saying there is an ongoing nuisance. We also claim that the water is a resource of the state, held in trust by the state for the benefit of the people. In Iowa, the people own the water. It's your resource that's being attacked. Number two, negligence. That is, reasonable standards of care have been breached by the conduct of new cooperative. And as a result of that breach, you have suffered damages along the lines that we have talked about. That's called negligence. Third, trespass. That pollutants emitted from new cooperative have interfered physically, a trespass, onto the rights and the property owned in trust by the state for your benefit, and in some cases, the actual property owned by you. So those are your three claims, and in each instance, we ask for damages. We've asked for a jury trial, and we've just begun this litigation. I am ready to answer questions that you may have, and then I'll have a brief closing statement at the end.
Okay, we have one.
We have a second one.
Yeah, I can walk around with
Okay,
this.
super. And I'll do the phone.
We had one question about what Missouri's response is in particular, because the Nishnabotna flows through the top part of Missouri before it feeds the Missouri River.
And I don't have an answer as to what they've done in a regulatory way. I know that they did their own study, and in fact, there was a certain period of time when it was easier to get information about this event from the Missouri DNR than it was from Iowa. So we have this unfortunate, it's a long-standing period of time where DNR has not had the resources that it needs to just do its job, and they have become experts in counting dead fish more so than in preventing the killing of fish. Just my own view.
Just to touch on that, Missouri has a sunshine law that any taxpayer money that's spent in the state is open to public review. So you just fill out an application form on their website and say, I'd like to have all of the man hours spent on this and whatever. So Missouri did its own fish kill count down there, as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and their results are forthcoming. They are also seeking I forget what it's called. No, it's an assessment and then a means of restoration. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife out of Iowa and Illinois, because this river crosses state boundaries.
Yes, there are statutes. The lawsuit that we just mentioned is you as a entity exercising the common law, non-statutory law, to seek remedies. There are statutes that can be invoked to protect the public interest in incidents such as like the Federal Clean Water Act and State Clean Water Act, and there may be more to announce at a later time. Yes.
You mentioned standing. Has it been determined if we have standing?
No, it will be challenged. It has not yet been determined. But you can expect that to be the first challenge of any suit like this. And I can't say for certain that'll be a court-made decision when a challenge. Some folks will be asked to issue sworn statements called declarations, in which case we'll prove up and we'll say, here's a representative sample. It's an impressive thing that you have over 200 or nearly 200 members, and we won't take every member to do a declaration, but a sampling of them. And well, you can expect that's a part of every one of these environmental lawsuits, is a challenge to standing.
I'm unfamiliar with what New Cooperative does. What is that business to have caused this spill?
Others who use the business could probably do a better job, but here, in essence, it's a group, in the old days, cooperatives, maybe it still is in some way, used to be owned by local people to serve each other with farm chemicals and supplies and that kind of thing. New cooperative has very aggressively in the last few years bought up lots of local cooperatives and is now a large entity, which presumably does the same thing. So offering fertilizers to farmers at certain times of years, for example, and so they had a huge holding tank, maybe a couple, I think, which held fertilizers, and the faucet was left on, and then no one was there to supervise during the weekend. So by the time they came back, a huge amount of the contaminant had gone into the river. Go ahead.
We're fortunate to have this gentleman who's spent 30 years of his life over there, so he can tell you what the co-op does, or what the co-op is.
Yeah,
Please do that.
I'm Mark McCaffrey. I work for United Farmers Cooperative. Just got bought out by New Co-op. I worked there 41 years. I retired. And I managed the lumber yard. So I was department level management with the co-op. And it is a co-op, and it's owned by member farmers. And it is an ag business, so it is an outlet for local farmers to buy their fertilizers, their seeds, their inputs. They also market the grains, the corn and the beans. So it is an integral part. You know, co-ops go into the Iowa. You know, that's part of Iowa, the co-ops. So that's basically what they do. Now, I know that it just seems to me, you know, being part of it, as I sat in some of the meetings, there is a sense there was some arrogance a little bit. It felt how they, you know, they felt that they, you know, this is what ag is in Iowa, and this is what they do. And sometimes you just kind of felt that some of the results, because they had some other issues in the past. Some other spill. I remember one time a tanker of fertilizer leaked in Villisca. So I'm sure if you go back, and I'm sure other co-ops have the same issues. You know, they're dealing with highly volatile products and dangerous stuff, chemicals. So they are at task to make it safe for our communities. So that's about it. So I'm glad to hear that there's a group taken to make them responsible for what they have done.
You know, go ahead, please. I have one response here. Nothing that we are doing in this lawsuit on our own as lawyers or on behalf of our clients has been or ever will be to demonize people in this industry. But the whole purpose of law, particularly laws involving tort and everything, is to ensure that each of us acting in our own ways are doing so in a way that makes it safe to live for others. That's why we don't allow trucks to go 100 miles an hour down the interstate, although they would probably like to if they could get there sooner, all the rest, because we know it's unsafe to the rest of us, let alone to the drivers of the vehicles. Here, we are arguing that there are certain standards of conduct that can or should be imposed on any entity like New Cooperative, and for whatever reason wasn't. How could you explain what happened if it were being operated in a way that was sufficient? And then if an accident happens, and they do happen, how can you have a spill like this killing 800,000 fish and all basically living entities in that with a market value that far exceeded what they were fined? How does that work? How does that work? How is the public interest served by that? But that's far short of demonizing anyone, which we will not do.
And just one,
Couldn't follow up maybe with a question. Is New Co-op, is it owned by local farmers? I'd like to know where their headquarters are. Is it in the state of Iowa?
Fort Dodge.
Fort Dodge.
Fort Dodge. It started there and then it's just been buying up more and more.
they have over 80 locations in Iowa and Missouri, 11th largest ag producer in the country. And just one final thing, we just have time basically. What are we asking for?
Well, it's when you start out a lawsuit, you lay out all the possible avenues of relief. What I would like to think, I think what the membership would like, is when all is said and done, that the entity here in Red Oak is safe, that there's almost no likelihood of it ever happening again, and the people would feel safe by using for fishing or for boating, that they don't have to worry what's gonna come into the river from it. But also see if we could encourage the company to improve all of its multiple locations, so that similarly, every one of those places, if there's a spill, it's gonna end up in a body of water somewhere. And what can we do to improve that? And if we don't have regulatory agencies, and the state of Iowa, we don't, that are sufficiently concerned about the quality of water, let alone the public health to do this, then the mechanism of private lawsuits is what we have. And so we want to create an environment where they're thinking very carefully about this kind of situation. We know they deal with harmful chemicals, all the more reason to protect the public.
So basically, the conditions have not changed. Everything that led to this event is ongoing, and not just the Red Oak location, all of their locations. So, and that's not acceptable. They can simply do better, be a better neighbor, put in berms, put in valves. I mean, industry standard stuff that, you know.
So I'd like to close with just a thought. I've taken more of your time than I deserve, but I wanted to share a thought. It goes along with the corollary, and it's tied to Nora Parks, but also to another figure who extremely motivating to me, Martin Luther King Jr. This is where their lives intersected. Martin Luther King Jr. was at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church that I described when Rosa Parks had decided not to move. And there were 5 major preachers in Montgomery, black preachers, but they were competitive with each other. And they couldn't decide who. In those days, of course, this might remind you something, the women did all the work and the men had all the linemen. I know that wouldn't happen in Cass County. But this is what was going on in Montgomery. 60% black to 40% a white population. And the ministers got together and they met and they created a new organization. What are we going to call it? Montgomery Improvement Association. Who's going to be president? Well, because the 5 couldn't get along, they appointed a new kid on the block, Martin Luther King Jr., 26 years old, who had just come down from Boston University where he was finishing up his PhD. He became the leader, and they thought this would be a one-day event. She was arrested on the first day of December, a Thursday. On Friday, they had this meeting at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, and they said, well, let's see what happens on Monday. They weren't sure a boycott would work. But there you have on Monday, not a black soul was on any of these buses. They knew they had some. Then they go, what do we do? What do we do? So on the 5th, Martin Luther King, now appointed president, is driven over to the Holt Street Baptist Church, which has been there. I've been in there. I've been moved. I stood at the podium where he was. It's not oftentimes visited, but to me it was a moving experience. And he wrote his sermon or his talk on the back of an envelope, and there were 7,000 people there to hear him speak. There was a national press. And when he spoke, he quoted, of course this was coming from his soul. He didn't have time to prepare. And he quoted from the Old Testament, Amos, chapter 5, verse 24. And he said, let justice roll down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. That had to be in his soul, because if you listen to his speeches, and the favorite ones were other lines are the ones that are quoted, whether in Iowa City, Iowa on November 11, 1959, or at the feet of Abraham Lincoln on August 28, 1963, or when he finished the march from Selma to Montgomery and stood at the base of the Capitol 104 years after the presidency had been taken in that building, or on the night before he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, April 3, 1968, where we remember the line about, I've seen the mountaintop, but I won't be there with you. In all of those instances, he quoted the same chapter, or the same verse, let justice roll down as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. Can we take a cue? We're talking about water here. And as we work together in Iowa to achieve environmental justice, let us also work to assure that when the waters and the mighty streams roll down, they are clean.
Hey.